صل على النبي المصطفى أحمد زكي اللهم صل على النبي وآله وصحبه محمد طاهر سيد جامع شافع شفاع.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. All praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord of the worlds, sustainer of the worlds. We send infinite blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are here again, inshallah, for our third podcast in the fiqh series. Inshallah, Shaykh Faizan is here as well. MashaAllah, we are very lucky to have, inshallah, a scholar that will hopefully be guiding us through this podcast, inshallah. So, brothers and sisters, we're straight away going to get into it. The first two podcasts were mainly about the sort of composing of fiqh, Islamic law, Imam, the Mujtahid, who we follow, how can we take different rulings from different Imams. So now we're at that stage where we're actually going to move on to contemporary issues and actually fiqh rulings that brothers and sisters that they're always in need of. Today's podcast is a very special podcast. It relates to economics and business. So I'm going to straight away get into it. Sheikh, often people think of Islamic law as like rules to do with wudu, how you perform your salah, rulings to do with hajj, and they only limit Islamic law or Sharia to that extent. Is this the right way to perceive Islamic law?
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. So that's a really interesting question, because often it is the case that when people see or view Islamic law, they often think of it as an aspect relating to rituals or an aspect relating to aspects of Tahara and so on and so forth. As for the other aspects of life, there's this perception that Islam doesn't really say anything and you can just do as you please. And that's really erroneous, because that really limits this oceanic religion to certain aspects of life at the neglect of other aspects. And remember, Islam is a complete way of life. And Islam being a complete way of life entails that it will shed light. When we say Islam, we mean the prophetic tradition. And so it sheds light on every aspect of our existence that's notable and that's worthy of requiring a certain avenue of action. And so therefore, Islam will necessarily talk to us about the various experiences, such as relationships, such as the way we do business, such as the way we govern society. And so Islam in this sense is quite unique in that it's not just a religion, right? Islam is a complete way of being. And so there are many other religions out there, like Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, for instance, and much of their focus is essentially at the private realm. As for the public realm, there doesn't appear to be any manifest directive in terms of how the religion is interpreted. Although we have to say, for example, in the Bible, there are aspects of governance, there are aspects of economics, but in terms of the way the religion is presented and theologically articulated, it doesn't appear to be. Islam is therefore a unique religion which offers humanity guidance on every aspect of the human condition that is important and significant, you see. And so everything we do really has an impact in terms of at the metaphysical level. And so we need to ensure that we live a life in such a way that it doesn't endanger our spiritual reality, which is the ultimate point of humanity. By virtue of being human, we are essentially spiritual creatures, and therefore everything we do is very important in terms of how we do that. And so that's not to say Islam gives us rules about everything. There are many aspects of the human life that Islam leaves it open for us. and in fact, most of the things are from the mubahat, the permissibles. And so when we say Islam offers guidance in terms of the human condition, it's in relation to significant matters. And so I hope that, inshallah.
So we often don't hear about economics from an Islamic point of view. So what does Islam say about economics?
Okay, so money and wealth being a very important aspect of the human experience, therefore it's inevitable that the prophetic tradition will offer us guidelines in terms of how we relate to wealth, how we relate to money. And so, for example, zakat, which is considered to be from the five pillars of Islam, a whole pillar, we may say 1/5 of that Buni al-Islam is based on relating to wealth, you see. There are many verses in the Holy Quran which talk about or give us some direction in terms of how we conduct a business. Allah says in the Quran, وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ and therefore Islam offers us a certain benign vision about how we relate to money and how we relate to transactions. And so this is governance aspect. So in Islam, there isn't anything like an economic policy or Keynesian or Friedman's approaches to how we conduct business or transaction. But Islam has much more governance principles in terms of giving us directives of wholesome ways in which we relate with money. And so, for example, we may say there are three aspects which really, in many ways, underpin our relationship with wealth and money and how we relate that in terms of our transactions. So primarily, first and foremost, the underlying principle of the way we relate with wealth and money is justice, al-adl. And so any transaction we have must be underpinned by a sense of justice. Anything that severs from justice is zulm. And therefore justice is really in many ways the key feature of economic transaction. Then there's also this sense of ta'awun, that mutual cooperation of wealth, mutual flow of wealth in society, you see. So for example, here's where zakat is very important. Zakat is a type of ta'awun, right? So this idea that you have billionaires and billionaires can do whatever they like with their wealth and completely neglect society, their fellow human beings, or the environment at large is completely erroneous in Islam. In Islam, the second principle of our economic transactions or our relationship with wealth is ta'awun, meaning mutual cooperation. So there is an emphasis of sharing that wealth, not hoarding that wealth for yourself, not developing monopolies, and so where you have this really ridiculous scenario where 1% of the people in society own and possess 70% of the world's wealth. This is very much a recent contemporary phenomena, which really took hold, about 200 years ago or so. And so Islam considers that as a type of batil. It's vanity. And so Islam is very much about sharing that wealth. So sharing that wealth through sadaqah, through zakat, and through mutual help of one another. So the point is there are aspects that Islam considers fundamental detriment in the way of this sharing, which is greed. And so Islam forbids greed and this possession. So Islam is not against the production of wealth. It's not against the accumulation of wealth. What Islam forbids is the hoarding of wealth and neglect of your fellow creatures, neglect of your fellow man, you see. And so it's about ta'awun. So that's the second principle, which really in many ways underpins the ethos of Islamic governance in relation to economics. And the final aspect is taradi. Taradi is mutual consent, mutual healthy consent. And so any type of coercion, any type of manipulation goes against the spirit of Islamic economic transactions. So it should be based on genuine consent, where people act through free will. They're not compelled by the state. They're not compelled by certain privileged monopolies or certain segments, elites of society. And so it must be based on free will and consent. Every economic transaction takes place through consent. And you might say, what's the significance of that? And so in the not too distant past, we had a whole organization which, really in many ways forbade the private ownership of wealth, and very heavy draconian measures to prevent people from accumulation of wealth. And so taradi must be very important. Taradi is very important, like a mutual consent. This happens by the person's own free desire, without any compulsion, without any sense of coercion. And so these are really the three kind of underlying principles which really in many ways reflect the ethos of Islamic economic transactions.
Can you give us specific examples or mention verses or hadiths in particular dealing with business issues, economics?
Yes, yes. I mean, indeed, there are numerous passages of the Quran which talk about certain unhealthy practices. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly condemns fraudsters. Well, it says, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ. And so this is a type of very strong condemnation of people who commit fraud, who deceive other people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another verse of the Holy Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. O you who believe, do not eat, لا تأكلوا أموالكم. Don't. Literally it means to eat of wealth, but it means engage in transaction بالباطل, with vanity, with falsehood. And so the ulama will later do tafsir of what this batil means. The batil means here, some ulama say it means gharar, some people say it means ghash, and some people say it means riba, and so on. So we'll go into that in terms of what that means. Allah mentioned in the Holy Quran, wa awful kayla, like fulfill the measure. Don't, for example, present something and not fulfill the proper implication of what you're presenting. And because there were traders, for example, who would present an item for sale, but when they actually gave it away, they gave less of it away. And so it was a type of duplicity, a type of fraud, we may say. And then there are other aspects of the way we eventually engage in economic transactions. For example, there's a hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the meaning of which is, we probably don't have the time to going through in terms of the Arabic, is don't sell what is not with you. This is a directive of Rasulullah, right? So meaning, if you don't have something, you can't trade it, right? So remember, it's mubadalatul mali bil mali. It's an exchange of wealth. Mubadalatul mali with another. So you're exchanging values. Yeah. But if you don't possess the value, if you don't possess the mal in the first place, then therefore, really that economic transaction cannot really take place. We'll go into the different implications of that in terms of how the scholars have interpreted this hadith, because different scholars have interpreted this hadith in different ways. Remember, there's also fiqhul hadith. There's hadith and there's fiqhul hadith, how the scholars have interpreted. And then there's another tradition where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions the people who engage in a contract. They have a choice to withdraw from the contract all the way to the end of their majlis, the place where the contract is. So the moment they move away from the contract, the textual aspect of this hadith seems to indicate that the contract becomes binding, and so people have a choice. And again, we'll look into the nature of this hadith in terms of the fiqh of this later. And so there are numerous accounts from the prophetic traditions and from the holy verses of the Holy Quran which talk about certain aspects of economic transactions in terms of offering governance principles.
What are the key features of an Islamic transaction?
Okay, so in terms of Islamic transactions, we would say there are three essential key features of any given contract. Okay, and I'll list them first, and then we'll look into a little bit of a detail in terms of what they imply. So the first, pardon me. So the first aspect is the mabi'a or the ma'hud alayh, meaning object of the exchange. Okay. Remember, in terms of an economic transaction, what's happening is there's something which is called commodity, and there's something which is called price. Okay, and this commodity is exchanged for another value. So this exchange takes place, right? So the possessor of the commodity, he or she considers the price, and the possessor of the price, he or she considers the commodity, right? And so the commodity is very important. It's the most integral aspect. And it's called different. It's called in different ways in different schools of thought in terms of different fiqh terminologies. But generally, mabi'a, the item which is being sold or exchanged. And so, number one, this item, or we would say the object of the contract. The object of the contract, and so the object of the contract, which is either a commodity or a service, a deliverable service, right? So, for example, sometimes it's not just an object that is being exchanged. Sometimes it's a service. Yeah. So, for example, you may have a consultant who offers a service. Sometimes you may have someone who makes an item, and so they use the service of their craft, okay, to make an item. And sometimes it's just the simple exchange of a good, of a service. So number one, this the object of the contract must, number one, be permissible. It must be halal. So any object or any service which is not permissible, that renders the contract void. Right, it doesn't take place from an Islamic point. So, for example, any sale of alcohol, any sale of pork, for example, any sale of intoxicants, or any service which is explicitly forbidden in Islam, is not permissible from the point of view of Islamic law of contract. Okay, so all these items are precluded. So the sale or the exchange will only take place as long as the object of the contract is permissible, is halal. Okay. Number two, this object, or this, in this case, it really is an object. It must only be private property. Must only be private property owned by an individual or a group of people. So meaning this precludes any public property. So any public property cannot be sold or exchanged. So, for example, we have awqaf, things which people have, given away for public use, such as the masajid, such as any land, for example, which is a waqf, like we would say public parks, and so these items, or public roads, for example, or passages, or avenues, or anything or bridges of that nature. So this the object must be private property. It's not state property or publicly owned. You see. Number three, it must be in existence. It must be. Remember, we just mentioned the hadith. Don't sell anything which is not in your possession, so to speak. So it must be in existence. So what does this mean? And so, for example, there are fruits on the tree which haven't grown yet, and so these fruit are considered to be ma'dum, right? Indeed, there are fruits which are growing on trees, but they haven't ripened, but they fall into the same hukam. Okay, fish in the sea have not been caught, and because they haven't been caught, they're not in the possession of people, right? And so you can't say, I will sell you a whole ton of fish when you haven't caught the fish, when the fish is still in the sea, you see. Milking the udders of a cow or a camel or a goat or a sheep, it hasn't come out of the udder. It's still not in the ownership or possession. And so it doesn't really exist to be in a position to be exchanged, you see. And also standing crops. So these crops haven't come to complete harvest yet. Uh, so what can possibly happen is that there could be a famine, there could be locust, and the crop could be destroyed. And so, really it hasn't really come into existence for economic applicability, you see. And also fetus in the womb. So, for example, if a cow is uh, the fetus in the cow, that can't be sold because it hasn't come into the world yet in that proper sense. And so you can't say, I sell you the fetus of the womb of my camel, in the womb of my camel or my cow or my horse for that matter, because there's a possibility it might be stillbirth. And so the object must be in existence. And you may say, well, okay, that's quite obvious, but in some cases it's not, you see. So, for example, the economic crash that took place in the beginning of this century took place primarily because people were buying and selling assets that were not in their possession. Okay, and so they were trading in futures, and those futures haven't even existed. And they were trading at multiple levels of the chain beyond the possession in the future, and that's what ultimately led to the crash, you see. And so it is relevant. Islamic ethos here is very important. Uh, and then it must be determined, meaning the item must be specified. Any unspecified item cannot be sold. Okay. So, for example, if you say to someone, I'm selling you uh, a sheep from that flock of sheep, right? That's not really permissible. Reason being is that sheep has not been identified. Okay, it hasn't been identified, and therefore, for example, it could be, let's say, what's the point of this? Let's say someone goes to purchase a sheep, from a farmer, and farmer says, I'll sell you, give me the money, a sheep from that, and then when he eventually gets the sheep, it's a really sick one, or it's a really frail one, or it's an unhealthy one. It's not a healthy one, and so the item has to be specified. And the item has to be specified. Or, for example, you could have in certain stores, someone says, I'll sell you a dress from this bundle. And the dress hasn't been seen, it has not been identified. And so the possibilities, he may give a low quality dress, a dress that the buyer doesn't like, and it creates a friction, you see. And so so the item must be specified. You should know what you're buying, and you should know what you're getting in exchange, you see. And then finally, uh, uh, the motivating purpose in the exchange must also be legal. So, for example, when you buy an item for illicit purposes, that contract is rendered void according to the most of the scholars. There's an ijma on that, right? Reason being why? Um, Reason being, if, for instance, there is a person who wants to buy grapes, and then he's going to use them for fermentation of alcohol and to derive wine from that, then the scholars say this, although grapes are permissible, they're halal. However, selling them with the wrong intention is completely is forbidden. Okay, so you can't sell. Likewise, for example, if someone comes, if you are a gun manufacturer, for example, or weapons manufacturer, you cannot sell weapons. In Islam, it's haram to sell weapons if those weapons are going to be used for illicit purposes. For illicit purposes. So the arms trade. So there are. You say, what's the point of that? There are governments in the world who permit arms trade. And so there are defense weapon companies who sell weapons to private entities or groups in certain parts of the world, and they know these weapons are going to be used for illicit purposes, meaning they are going to be used for illegal wars, they're going to be used in a civil war, for example. And so even though the selling of a weapon intrinsically is permissible, you can sell a sword, you can sell a gun, but if you happen to realize that this weapon is going to be used for zulm or injustice, then the sale is not permissible, you see. And so the first aspect is this, the mabi'a, the object of sale. Okay. So the second aspect, and we'll rush through this because I know we don't have the full time to really go into depth. Inshallah, we'll have an intensive program where we spend a whole day. We'll inshallah invite people to the masjid, and we'll have a whole day where we just talk about Islamic economics and its relevant and practical import. And so the second aspect is sigha, meaning the nature in which the method in which the items are exchanged and confirmed. Okay, so in this sense, the general guideline is that the method of exchange must be through words, right? Must be through words. In other words, the persons should express an interest about an item, al-ijab wal-qubul, and so you must say, I am interested in buying that book. Okay, so this expression must be manifest, right? And so, for example, gestures, according to scholars, are not really permissible. So you can't indicate like that for an item, because why? Because it's going to create doubt, and where there's doubt and uncertainty, that's one of the underlying ilal. It's an underlying illah for the prohibition of a contract. And so the gestures are only allowed in the urf, where these gestures imply certainty. So, like for example, in certain auctions, in the urf of an auction, a gesture, someone doing a gesture is really في حكم الكلام, is في حكم الكلمة. But outside of that, any gesture that is used, or ishara, or indication with the body, or something of that, or a sign, or something like that. So it has to be an explicit word. It has to be kalam, whether it's spoken or written. Number two, it has to be in the past tense, meaning meaning that this expression of interest has to be concluded. So in Islamic law, or generally in language, the madi, sighatul madi, is an indication of tahaqquq. It's taken place, right? Whereas mudari has implication of present or future, which hasn't taken place. And so when you say, I will sell you this, it implies uncertainty, because I will could be I may not. And so to avoid that uncertainty, the past tense should be used. I have sold you this item, I have bought this item. Some scholars say amr, command, like sell me this item, is permissible. As long as the circumstantial evidence indicates genuine expression of interest. And then the final aspect is it must be in the same majlis, right? Meaning that the contract must take place in that one sitting, essentially. So, for example, let's say if we try to exchange an item, I say I have bought this, and I have sold this, and you say you have bought this, but you don't say that, you go away. That item has not been sold, because you have not expressed your qubul, and so it has to be ittihadul majlis. So the contract must be concluded in one sitting. Okay, there is a case, for example, where consideration of a contract. So you talk about an item, and the item is expressed. and you say, for example, I'm selling this. You say I have bought this, and there's an expression of interest, and that has taken place. But then later on, you go back. There is a possibility of khiyar in this. Khiyar means option. Okay. Uh, let's say in the case where an expression of interest has been said, but the other person hasn't accepted the offer, but then later goes away, has I think about that, and then comes back to another majlis and say an expression of interest is regenerated, and then the ijab and qabul takes place, although the initial bargaining, as it were, or the negotiation took place in another majlis. But when we say ittihad al-majlis, it means the expression of interest, the ijab and qabul takes place in one instance. There isn't a gap between them. And because the gap denotes uncertainty, right? People may forget the conditions of the offer. People may think of more aspects and complications. And so it has to take place in one instant, as it were. And the final aspect is the third aspect in relation to the exchange, is ahliya. What does ahliya mean? Look, so the Sharia, the Shari'i khitab is threefold. Khitab means when Allah or the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam address humanity on a particular issue. And the scholars say there are essentially three types of khitab. There's a khitab lil ibadah. The khitab is in relation to perform prayer, for example, or do zikr, or do hajj, or do fasting. Okay. Then there's a khitab which is jinai, meaning that khatab in relation to criminality, like, don't do this because this is a criminal act, so to speak. And so Allah is prohibiting certain illegal aspects of human activity. And then there's the khitab lil mu'amalat, khitab, and these are all shari'i, these are divinely ordained. Khitab lil mu'amalat, this is a khitab in relation to transactions in terms of how we have these transactions and relationships. And so khitab is really addressed to a human being who is completely worthy of receiving the khitab, who has the capacity to receive the khitab. So, for example, a person who is a child doesn't really have the capacity to appreciate the implication of the khitab, right? And so when we talk about khitab and ahliya, we're really referring to the issuance of directives to human beings who are sound of mind, to be able to understand the implication of the khitab and be able to deliver that khitab. So therefore, this precludes generally a person who's insane, a person who is afflicted by safha, like which is folly. We may say in the modern age, this is known as people with special needs. Yeah? People who, although they're not insane, but they have certain developmental needs due to an illness or for whatever kind, that they're not able to really, they don't have rushd. So they may have aql, but the aql isn't sound. They don't have rushd. And so rushd is really in many ways an high ability for discretion. So there are many people who can think cognitively, but they don't have discretion. They don't have that deeper understanding of the implications of what they're about to get into. And so these types of people, and also a child. So a child is divided into two categories. There is sabi غير مميز. Sabi, a child غير مميز, meaning this child doesn't have the ability to make discretion. So, like a 4-year-old doesn't really know the implication of what they're about to do. But then you have a sabi mumayyiz, a child who does have discretion, who does have enough insight to know what they're buying, and they know the notion of exchange. And so in relation to these three, so the scholars say that the khitab, so any type of transaction which involves a sabi mumayyiz, sabi mumayyiz, a child. So generally speaking, a child's economic transaction is invalid, right? But only the child's, the Sabi Mumayyiz child's transaction is valid as long as it has the consent of a guardian, such as a parent or someone who looks after them, right? And generally, that's in relation to aspects which don't incur detriment, so to speak. Okay, so a Sabi Mumayyiz can buy and exchange an item with another person as long as they have consent, right? Uh, and similarly, the Safi, so the one with special needs, can also exchange as long as they have consent, as long as they have some kind of direction from someone who has ability to for discretion. As for insanity, as for the person who is infirm in that sense, their transaction is not permissible, and so their transaction will only take place through another agency, which is wakala, which is an agency basically. So another person who's been designated their wakil can exchange items on their behalf. Okay, and there's a fourth element as well, is someone who's at their deathbed. And so Islam is a very dynamic religion. It's like, for example, someone who is in their maradul maut, the illness which the doctors have said will eventually lead to death based on evidence and experience. So these people have certain restrictions, and so there's something called hajar, which is an interdiction. Hajar means prevention of buying and selling, right? And so there's a limitation on the person on their deathbed in terms of what they can sell and what they can buy and what they can conduct. So, for example, the person on their deathbed, their talaq is invalid, right? Because the clear evidence is they're only divorcing to prevent the wife from inheriting. So that divorce does not take place in the Shara. And so they can't give away all of the items to a certain person either. So there's a hajar. So there's a limit. So they can give away, but there's a hajar of what they can give away because of that condition, you see. And so really the economic transactions are based on ahliya, based on people's ability. And ahliya, there are two aspects, is aql and rushd. Both must be in place for complete capacity. So this is really what we're saying is legal capacity to be in a position to buy and sell based on the khitabul ilahi. You see?
Are there any aspects that the Sharia prescribes or forbids in particular?
Okay, so Imam Taqiyuddin mentioned something quite beautiful. He mentions that in terms of the ahkam in relating to the ibadat, the hukm shari is only what Allah prescribes, essentially, right? So we can't make up our own ibadah. So Allah says, "Aqim salah," we perform salah. Allah mentioned in terms of sadaqah, we give sadaqah. Allah says, "Kutiba alaykum siyam," we do, you know, and so on and so on. And so we can't make up an ibadah. And so any ibadah that's done must be based on these usul, must be linked, must have an asl in the ibadah. So this is why Sayyida Aisha was asked about bid'ah. Sayyida Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, La asla laha fi din. La asla laha. It doesn't have any asl in the deen. Meaning this innovation, this new aspect of worship, it doesn't have any connection, implicit or explicit connection with the deen itself. Okay. However, on the other hand, he says that in relation to the mu'amalat, they are all essentially permissible. Every single aspect of the mu'amalat are permissible. There's a hilla. And this is based on the principle al-aslu fil ashya'i hilla, ibaha. Al-aslu fil ashya'i al-ibaha. Ibaha means permissibility. So all things really in terms of mu'amalat are permissible unless the Sharia proscribes them, meaning forbids them. It's only then when that relationship or exchange or interaction becomes one. The rest is all. And so most of the human aspects of life are permissible. So the only aspects of life which are not permissible are the aspects that the Sharia has obliged us to be away from, you see. So there are acts of omission, uh, and there are acts of omission. And so the aspects which are omitted are based on hukum shari. So we can't just say anything isn't, or any such item or any interaction is not permissible when there's no legal basis for it, you see. So, for example, in relation to economic transaction, in relation to our muamalat, particularly in relation to exchange of wealth, there are essentially three aspects. So just like we had the three usul directives in relation to how we really govern our economic affairs, we have three aspects. And if any of these aspects are in that interaction, that makes that particular transaction batil, right? Void, impermissible. غير جائز. And so the first aspect is gharar. And gharar basically means uncertainty. And so any item we are not sure of, we mention some here, any items which are not sure of, things which are not designated, things which are not specified, things which haven't come into existence, things which can't be deliverable, or if they are deliverable, there's a huge risk for that the deliverability of an item. In such cases, these items, that interaction is not permissible. So number one rule or underlying is gharar, uncertainty. Remember, there's futures trading and so on. A lot of those aspects are based on speculation. The economic aspects of Islam are not based on speculation fundamentally. They're based on certainty. And why? Because ultimately the whole point is to avoid tanazur, right? Tanazu. So this is from the maqasid of shara in relation to economic transaction. Any aspect where there is likely to be tanazu. Tanazu means argumentation. And any aspect which is going to lead to tanazu is not permissible. And gharar is the fundamental aspect that leads to tanazu, uncertainty, undesignated, selling items which haven't even come into existence, and so on and so forth, is not permissible. The second aspect is ghash. Ghash means trickery and deception. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in one hadith, "Man ghashana falaysa minna." Anyone who deceives us is not from us. And so any type of deception, any type of ulterior motive, any type of underhand activity in terms of economic transactions, such as fraud, such as hoarding, particularly with the intention of selling at a later point, these types they all fall under. So, for example, a person buys, for example, so in one tradition, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade the selling of the same genus of an item uh, at a varied rate. So, for example, we have dates, yeah. So we have good quality dates and we have bad quality dates, right? So someone buys 5 kilos of bad quality dates for the price of 1 kilo of good quality dates, right? So the rich owner, who has all these good quality dates, he sells kilo and buys 5 kilos of bad quality dates. Then he hoards them. And so the person who's bought the good quality dates, these dates finish very quickly. Later on, the hoarding of the bad quality dates gets to a point where only he has these items, and then he sells them when those bad quality dates have kind of perished in other aspects of market, and so on and so forth. So this is a type of rush. This is a type of rush. It's a type of deception, or selling an item. So, for example, in classical Arabia, they would present their goods in such a way that the good quality items were at the surface of the visible aspect of the thing being sold. Beneath the surface were really bad quality or rotten items, and so any item with where the defect has not been mentioned, or there's a type of deception, that's also not permissible. And then the final aspect, which is the illah for the prohibition of something, is called is darar. Is darar. Like darar means harm or injury. So in one hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "La darara fil Islami, la darara fil Islami, wala dirara." There's no incursion of harm. There's no reciprocation of harm. So one of the fundamental aspects of the Islamic, the ethos of Islamic law is the end of harm. So anywhere where there is harm, that particular aspect is forbidden in Sharia. So there's nothing which Allah has forbidden except that it is essentially harmful for the people. And so any economic transaction that's going to lead to loss or harm another person is not permissible, such as, for example, riba-based transactions, such as interest. So, for example, a person lends some money to another person, but the capital sum that's given back is given back with extra sums. So, for example, if a person gives £1,000 in loan, and then 2, 3 years later, what he gets back is 2,500, right? Or 1,500 or 1,000. That's an example of darar. The other person has incurred harm, and so it's a type of exploitation. It's a type of exploitation, and that's injurious to humanity, and so that's another reason which makes a transaction illicit in Islamic law. So just to remind, gharar, ghash, and darar. And if these aspects are in that transaction, then that transaction is not permissible.
Okay, Sheikh, you seem to refer to the impermissibility of items, of items in exchange which you don't possess. But many times in the modern era that we live in, items are sold without possession. So people
Yes,
have it and
yeah,
selling it.
yes.
So what's the ruling on that?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, because you are right. There are many items that are exchanged without immediate possession of items. And so what does the hadith mean where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, do not sell what is not with you. And so, for example, you give away your money. Let's say if you're trading by Amazon, you give away your money. The item you've given one item, but you don't possess an item, right? So what does the Sharia say in relation to this? So this is based on 3 ways the ulama have understood this tradition. Do not exchange and do not sell something which is not in your possession, or do not, the meaning, implicit meaning is don't exchange anything which is not really in your possession. And so the first group of fuqaha, and these are the Ahnaf, the Hanafi scholars, they realizing the nature of the markets at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is where the market economy is not that sophisticated, and so they look at the illah of this hadith, and the illah of this hadith is really talking about the potential condition where you've given an item away. The likelihood is that you're not going to get the exchange later on. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is really forbidding as a saddu zara'i. There's a principle in usul al-fiqh called saddu zara'i, like we would say in colloquial terms, in nipping it in the bud, as it were, preventing something from arising, like argumentation or tanazo, before it's taken place. And so what they do is there's a principle called istihsan. Istihsan is when you have a text which implies a certain aspect, but istihsanan, there are avenues of permissibility due to various reasons. And so, for example, there's a bay which is called bay salam, where where one part of the exchange takes place, and later the other part of the exchange arrives for the person. So, for example, if you commission someone to build your table, or to build you an item or whatever, or produce an item, they will find it very difficult to purchase the resources needed to make the item. So you need to give them the money so they can make the item. And so as long as there are measures and checks and balances in place and guarantees and possible liabilities if the item has not been sent, then there is a permissibility to forward the item in exchange for delivery of an item later on, you see. And this is based on istihsan. And this is based on recognition that the markets became more sophisticated and more regulated. So at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the markets aren't regulated. The ability to produce goods was very limited. But later on, the manufacturing industry arose, and the ability to produce goods was tremendously of a higher capacity than in ancient times. And so istihsan, and they permit that. And then the Shafi'is mentioned that this hadith refers to fungible goods, like goods which are mithli, that they have like for example, oil is a fungible good. So oil is available everywhere, right? It's not a specific item. And so the Shafi'i say this hadith refers to a'yan, like specific items, so I'll sell you this house, or selling a certain car, or selling a certain animal, right? Or selling a certain, item which is specific, right? That cannot be sold unless it's in your possession. As for fungible goods, like mathali, so for example, if you sell oil or wheat, for example, and there are numerous wheats available everywhere in the world, or there are numerous types of oil available everywhere in the world, so the Shafi, it doesn't refer to that. And then the Hanbali scholars, their interpretation of this hadith is that this hadith doesn't mean adam, meaning Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam isn't applying the adam of an item. He's implying the possibility of gharar in relation to the item being exchanged. So any item which can't be delivered is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, do not sell. So it's the deliverability. Imam Ibn Qayyim mentions this, and various other Hanbali scholars. But generally, the modern Islamic economic takes place essentially through the Bay' Salam avenue, which is istihsan, and you see.
Thank you for the explanation. Okay, moving on swiftly now to the highlight of a contemporary issue. We have a big issue in terms of interest-based transaction, where as a Muslim we believe riba interest is haram. Well, how do we navigate these issues in the current times? Have the scholars made any mitigations to the law? So, for example, like we got tuition fees, you got interest on bank accounts, car insurance, taking into that for business.
Yeah,
So,
certainly. No, it's a
what's
very
the guidance on that?
very important question. A very important question. Look, the general answer is any transaction that has interest in it is not permissible. Is not permissible. And therefore any loan, any mortgage, any insurance, or anything of that nature is generally impermissible. However, uh, in order to understand this second aspect, or really the istisna aspect, is we need to appreciate that firstly, ahkam, there are ahkam, and there are applicability of ahkam. So in certain conditions and circumstances, the ahkam don't apply. So, for example, prayer is obligatory upon men and women. However, when women are going through menstruation, right, does that mean they still pray? No. Okay. And so because of menstruation is a certain condition, then therefore the hukum shari'i of prayer does not apply. It's not that it's not there, it just doesn't apply in that context. Okay. And so there are aspects in relation to the worldly conditions as well. So in Islam, there are two types of abode: Darul Islam and Darul Harb. Okay, Darul Islam is the abode of Islam, where these benign principles of economic justice and good governance and prophetic guidelines are there, are well established, and therefore any type of exploitation is impermissible. Any type of hoarding or manipulation or rush and gharar is just not there. Okay, but then there's Darul Harb, you see. And Darul Harb is the abode of kufr. is the abode of war. And when we say abode of harb, doesn't necessarily imply the act of war. It implies the potentiality of war. But really, the import of Darul Harb is land which doesn't really live its life based on the benign principles of the prophetic path. Okay, so and so there are certain ahkam in relation to Darul Harb, Darul Islam, which don't apply in Darul Harb. And so, for example, there is a tradition from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who mentions لا ربا بين المسلم والحرب في دار الحرب أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. And the la here is the la nafiya. It's not the la nahiya, as some people misinterpret. The la nafiya means negation. There's no such thing as riba بين الحرب بين المسلم والحرب في دار الحرب أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, Darul Harb by extension, non-Muslim, fi Daril Harb, in the abode of war, in the abode where Islamic laws are not established, you see. And so based on that, if, for example, if the Shariah mentions a certain aspect as an exception, that exception is applicable. And so therefore, based on that, in the abode of war, which doesn't have rules of Islam, this aspect doesn't come into existence in the first place for it to be applicable, you see. And so that's one perspective. And many of the classical Hanafi scholars had this opinion, and this opinion has been followed, although there are recent contemporary Hanafis who have gone against that general kind of principle or an interpretation of the Hanafi school, although for their reasons of ijtihad. Remember, ijtihad, every mujtahid, every scholar who's qualified has the right of ijtihad. I'm only presenting ijtihad. For those, I'm presenting ijtihad. It's up to you how you respond to this ijtihad. And part of my service is to present scholarship. This is what the scholars have said, as opposed to in terms of you following which ijtihad, that's entirely up to you. That's based on your istafti qalbak. That's you are presented with the material. If, for instance, you want to follow it, if not, that's your choice. Okay, I'm merely presenting ijtihad, you see. And the ijtihad of the Hanafis, classical Hanafis, was this. The second aspect is the aspect in relation to durura. This is different to the riba not being applicable, the transaction between a Muslim and a Harbi. And so this is an aspect of durura. Okay, so for example, in the conditions or states or circumstances where darar or hardship arises, there are certain flexibilities in Sharia. So, for example, just to initially give present an example of this. So, if you're out in the forest and you're about to perish, and there is no other food item out there, it's permissible for you to eat swine flesh, right? Or it's permissible for you to drink alcohol if that's the only beverage available for you to drink to be satiated or to save yourself, essentially. Okay, and that's why the principle is ad-daruratu tubihul mahzurat. Necessary circumstances of hardship and detriment tubihul mahzurat, they make permissible the mahzurat, the things which are otherwise forbidden. But it's the condition. So they're essentially always forbidden, but the condition is an avenue to be safeguarded from the darar, right? So anything which Allah has forbidden is always forbidden, right? But there are certain avenues for the preservation of other maqasid, like one of the maqasid of Shar'iah is protection of life. Then these aspects are basically avenues for preservation of other aspects of the Shariah, you see. And so there are other principles. Al-mushaqqatu tajlibul yusr. Any hardship, tajlibul yusr, right, it begates ease. So there's mechanism within the Sharia that if you encounter circumstances of extreme hardship, tajlibul yusr, the Shari'i mechanism come into place to bring about an ease, right? And al-amru idha daqa ittasa'a. Al-amru idha daqa ittasa'a. When the amr, when the affair, when the particular circumstance is that daqa becomes so narrowing, meaning that it's so difficult to live life, ittasa'a, the Shari'i mechanism come into place to expand so that you can live with a degree of ease. that prevents you from this, situation, dire situation, you see. And so in these circumstances, when we are, for example, in the Western world, or generally everywhere these days, where the means to purchase a house, for example, or the means to purchase education, the other means are not available, or if they're available with a great degree of hardship. Um, there aren't essentially halal avenues out, and you've exhausted all other possibilities. So, for example, let's say, for example, of buying a house. So, in terms of buying a house, you don't just go straight for the loan, right? What you do is or the interest-based loan. What you do is you explore, you speak to people, you say to businessmen, look, if you lend me 10,000, and you ask another business, if you lend me another 10,000, and then you accumulate 200,000 of a loan from various people, somewhat prosper. Remember, we said right at the start, wealth has an implication. If you are extremely wealthy and you're not helping your fellow man, like giving loans, this is the point. So the point of wealth is not just consumption for self. There's the ibtila of wealth. So there are very wealthy people out there who never give loans, generally speaking, right? Or who don't do shukr. So wealth has implication. Wealth has implication, and part of being extremely wealthy is looking at your fellow man in terms of their needs. So there are people who are not that wealthy, and you should avail them finances. That's part of your function. You're in test. When you go, you take none of this money with you, right? And so you go with what you did with the wealth. In your grave, your wealth doesn't come with you, but what you did with that wealth goes with you. The metaphysical karmic implication of what you did with that wealth, whether you hoarded it, whether you exploited other people, whether you were lost in that frenzied greed, right? Or whether you helped someone out. A scholar was going through difficulty and hardship, right? You said, don't worry, mashallah, I've got your back. I'm going to finance you. I'm going to be your patron, right? And subhanAllah, that metaphysical effect of that charity, that sadaqah, as well as everything that the scholar does from there on, goes with that person in his grave. And so you explore halal avenues. So it's based on durura, remember. And so if you explore all the halal avenues, right, and they still, then you begin to make that kind of decision. Is look, you explore your situation. Darar, is this encouraged? And so, for example, in relation to look, for people who are living on rent, right? Look, the darar and mushaqqa and the haja in relation to living on rent is look, you are essentially paying someone else's mortgage, number one, which is haram in the first place. Like the person who's got the mortgage in that sense without hardship, right? Because there are people who they've got one property and they do another mortgage to buy another property, which I'll mention when then this is permissible based on the ijtihad. So you're paying someone else a mortgage, you're incurring a huge loss month in, month out. You're not possessing any value. You're losing and losing to the point where, for example, later on, rents rise. Rents are rising. So, for example, the interest payments must be, I don't know, I don't have a house, right, or own a house. But, interest, I'm guessing it's about £700, right? 700, and if you're, because I've been renting, sometimes it's £1,200 for a normal 3-bedroom house, and then a year later that goes to 1,300, and then a year later that goes to 1,500. So you're paying £1,500 of rent, where there's someone who's doing mortgage is paying for 700. There's hardship, there's a darar that's going to take place. And remember, قَائِدَ الْفَقْرُ أَنْ يَكُونَ كُفْرًا. And so these avenues are based on other maqasid of shara'. Right, and so if there's a detrimental level of harm, in that is mitigated. It has to be mitigated. Yuridullahu bikum al-yusra. There's no harj in deen, right? And so due to the other aspect of shara, these mitigating aspects come into place. So based on that, then it becomes permissible for you to take the loan. And therefore, as a haja, from a zurura point of view. But the scholars say only to the limit to fulfill your need and to end the harm. And and to end the harm. So you've got your house now, right? It's yours, you're still paying mortgage and interest and all that. But then you don't get greedy and then buy another house on mortgage and another house, which a lot of people do, you see. But they will say they're basing on the first aspect, la riba. There's no such thing as riba, the applicability of riba in Darul Harb, right? But generally speaking, the scholars would frown on if you basically went out and bought another house with another mortgage. So to only fulfill your need in terms of, and there are people now who advocate, and their ijtihad is, I respect that. That's their ijtihad. They will say, look, you go somewhere else, right? You can stay on rent. Okay, but then they're not consistent with their own ijtihad, because they will say, oh, insurance also involves a lot of risk. You're paying for something that you don't really possess. It's a possibility, in the future of an accident or something like that. And therefore, it's mandatory. It's by law. You have to do that, and therefore they permit insurance, but they say no interest-based mortgage loan. And there's no consistency here, because you don't have to have a car. You can use public transport. You use public transport. So there's no mandatory insurance for public transport. So you can use a taxi. You can ask someone for a lift every day, to drop you off at your place of work, which is 2 hours away. But then they'll say, oh no, because it's mandatory and therefore there's darar, it's haja, it's too difficult. Well, this is also difficult. Also, you're incurring loss there. So be consistent with the ijtihad, you see, and so, or respect other people's ijtihad. Don't enforce your opinion. And I remember right at the beginning of this podcast, I said there's deen, sharia, and there's fiqh. And fiqh, like in this hadith we talked about, this hadith, famous hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't sell anything which is not. There's 3 strands of interpretation, fiqh hadith, you see. So what I don't like is people, like lampooning their ideas and their ijtihad and say, this is the only interpretation. Please, for Allah's sake, don't do that, because you create a fitna. Don't be absolutist in your ijtihad, right? If you believe in a certain opinion based on your ijtihad, then share it with people. But don't denounce the ijtihad of other people. This is a travesty. And this is something that's happening in almost every single Muslim denomination. You do ijtihad, your ijtihad is the only way, and there's no way of the highway, right? Respect other people's ijtihad on that. And so I'm only presenting ijtihad. If you don't like this ijtihad that the scholars have done, then you are at complete liberty to follow the ijtihad of another scholar. But don't condemn it to this level, the kind of condemnation that people end up doing. You see, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, there are people who are recipients of zakat, and they call them mu'allifatul qulub. Allah explicitly mentions them in the Quran. Allah explicitly mentions them in the Quran. Yet Sayyidina Umar decided from his ijtihad not to give zakat to these people, mu'allafatul qulub, because he felt that the circumstances in which the revelation was revealed, there was a need for that, and this need no longer applies. Yet it's the nas of the Quran, right? The nas of the Quran is the penalty for theft. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu annulled that penalty at one point in his caliphate due to the hardship that people were going through. Famine took place, people are desperate, they're in difficulty, right? And therefore cancel the penalty for that particular circumstances. And this is the nature of the Sharia. The Sharia is very comprehensive. It's has and it really needs to be understood at the deeper level to appreciate that we respect everyone's ijtihad, and we this is mara'atul ikhtilaf, right? We take into account that there are some people who are very passionate about their ijtihad, respect that completely, but we have to be consistent in terms of that ijtihad, and so this is based on the ijtihad. I've presented all opinions here, and it's up to yourselves which opinion you wish to follow.
Jazakallah for that. That was quite a detailed explanation of a very controversial issue. Okay, swiftly moving on because time is of the essence. Another feature of modern times is the emergence of new currencies. So we have paper money came out in the 18th and the 19th century. Now we have something called the bitcoins, cryptocurrency, is that permissible in the Sharia?
Okay, I mean, the scholars haven't really deliberated extensively on that for us to really present the ijtihad. Uh, and so all I'll mention for now is that what is a currency and a commodity? Remember, currency is something that represents value, and that value is based on a commodity. That value is based on a commodity. Um, and so, for example, the paper money that we deal in is represented by the value which is determined at an official state level. Traditionally used to be the gold standard and so on and so forth, but it's still represented by official value. Behind it is, but if we don't have any currency which is not backed by a commodity or value determined officially, then that opens up avenues for exploitation and gharar. So there could be people presenting currency which is based on brute force. So you can have a very powerful country. It says this is the currency that we're dealing with. It's not represented by any value, and so there are many problems with gharar, exploitation, harm, and so on and so forth. Based on that, many scholars are very circumspect about this type of transaction, and so until the cryptocurrency doesn't have any official value or official representation of value, it will always be somewhat dubious. And at the moment, it's in a very arbitrary state in terms of value, and it's not the currency with which the world deals with. And therefore, my advice is generally to avoid it.
Okay, whilst we're on currency, is forex trading permissible?
Okay, so forex trading is what does that mean? So forex trading is the exchange of currencies, and remember the currencies are different jins. So dollar is different jins to the pound, and the yen is a different jins to the rupee, and so on and so forth. So so there are certain scholars who have reservations with even this, but generally trading in currencies is considered permissible. And so what you're doing really is you nominate a broker who does the transaction on your behalf, and so you will sell pounds for dollars or dollars for pounds. The scholars say it's permissible as long as there's possession of the items of currency. If there's no possession, then the scholars consider it impermissible. The least level of possession is that one party has to at least possess the possess the item for it to be. But in that case, then that item must be exchanged at the current market rate, right? Whereas if both parties possess the item, then that any rate will be permissible. You see, and so, but again, it's a very novel economic transaction. And the scholars, haven't really deliberated extensively on it. But generally, it involves this, so the idea is that the dollar could be worth a certain amount in the future, and you sell it for a low price to gain a profit later on with the pound and so on and so forth. This is the nature of it. And so even the reason for speculation, some scholars are somewhat circumspect, but it is permissible by a significant group of scholars, but with conditions, basically.
Thank you. Okay, the final question for today's podcast: what is the Islamic ruling on shares, and is zakat payable on shares?
So shares are assets, and they're considered as mal. So a share is a share in a certain company which you bought. So you bought a portion of the company, a share of that company for a price, and it's completely permissible as long as that company. Remember, going back to Mabi'a, as long as that company doesn't deal in haram. So you can't buy shares in a wine company. You can't buy shares in any company which deals with illicit item. Okay, and so in terms of the zakat on the share, the zakat on the share is according to almost every scholar, is that the zakat on the shares is applicable if the shares are being bought and sold for profit. Okay, if they actually So if you decide to buy shares, right, but not keep them, but then to sell them, then the zakat is applicable on that share. But if you just buy a share and you possess that share, the zakat is only applicable on the profit from that share, from the dividend that you receive annually, but not the whole of the share. Mafhum? Inshallah, that's the journey.
Jazakallah khair. That brings us to the end of today's podcast. It's been very informative, and I think we've learned so much about economics and business that we normally don't get to learn. Inshallah, next week's podcast will be on social and cultural issues. I
Social
think
and
that's
cultural,
going to be a
inshallah.
very important one as well. I don't think we've discussed that more much in our community. So a lot of social and cultural issues are going to be discussed. So I hope brothers and sisters tune into that also. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
اللهم صل على النبي المصطفى أحمد زكي اللهم صل على النبي وآله وصحبه محمد طاهر سيد جامع شافع شفاع